Okay, good afternoon. My name's Ramon. A couple of weeks ago, my opponent, Stephanie, came before you and claimed that homosexuality is indeed biological. Well, I am going to counter this claim. I'm going to make a rebuttal. And I now claim that homosexuality is not biological, that homosexuality is caused by another factor. Well, in addition to this, my opponent, Stephanie, failed completely to prove her point. My opponent came to you with three major claims. One of them, that there is physical differences between a heterosexual man and a homosexual man. Second, homosexuality is found to be genetic, and in most cases, it's related to their mother. And then the third claim was that the absence of the male hormone during pregnancy has a correlation with attraction of males to other males. Well, I'm going to counter this with three major claims. Number one, that the evidence that my opponent gave to you is erroneous. Second, that my opponent failed completely in her claim. And third, that homosexuality is proven to be caused by another factor. So starting with the first one, homosexuality is indeed genetic. My opponent used a piece of evidence that claims that homosexual men have their index finger larger than their ring finger in comparison to heterosexual men who have their ring finger larger than their index finger. Well, a study made by Neil McKenna of 750 alleged homosexuals shows different. It shows that in fact these 750 homosexuals had their index finger larger than their ring finger. So by this I proved that my opponent failed to prove her claim and she gave you erroneous evidence. Second, my opponent also failed to prove her claim because, well, when my opponent came before you, she claimed that homosexuality is indeed biological. And she presented you with evidence trying to convince you. Now, to understand why she failed to prove her claim, you must understand the definition of homosexuality. The American Heritage Dictionary defines homosexuality, and I quote, having a sexual orientation to persons of the same sex. So this means that men and women can both be homosexual. When my opponent came before you, she never presented you with one single piece of evidence that claims that homosexuality is biological in women too. She didn't present you with one single piece of evidence. So by this, she fails to prove her claim. Lastly, homosexuality is proven to be caused by a different factor. In an article by Dr. Meredith Small, the gay debate, is homosexuality a matter of choice or chance? That's the name of the article. She claims that homosexuality is proven to be caused by another factor, and this factor is the family structure that people are brought up to, and this can cause homosexuality. For example, if a little kid is raped by a same sex, there's a high chance that this little kid can turn out to be homosexual, and this has nothing to do with the biological structure that he has. So this also proves that my opponent failed to prove her claim. So now, in conclusion, for the last couple of decades, homosexuals have been fighting for their civil rights as citizens of this country. They have been fighting for the right to get married. They have been fighting for equality. They are close of getting there, and they are close of carrying the torch of victory, of democracy, of equality, of individualism. But one of the alleged evidence to grant such rights is that homosexuality is biological. But this evidence is disproved by so many other factors that they are not going to get to this victory that they so want. Thank you.
All right, the advocate's points are labeled. You do specify that there's a counterclaim that you're going to be developing, and then you kind of preview your own arguments. On the first point, it sounds like you've got some data that is counterindicative of the relationship between the ring finger and the index finger, but it was a little bit confusing. I'm not sure if you were giving us a direct quote or if you're paraphrasing the results of McKenna's research, and we need to contrast that to the conclusion that was presented by the advocate. It was just a little hard to figure out what the point was that you were making. I guess your data shows an opposite conclusion, but the evidence was not cited as clearly as it needed to be. On the definition of homosexuality, I thought that this was an interesting argument that you made that suggests, for instance, that homosexuality is only being demonstrated as maybe genetically or biologically linked in homosexuality in men, and there's no discussion of homosexuality in women in this particular context. I'm not sure that that undermines the entire argument, but it definitely shows that there is a failure on some level of reasoning, that we've got a hasty generalization or a kind of a extended statement on this particular point, and that's a reasonable criticism to make. On the third point, where you're talking about counter-causality, you're suggesting that family structure might have an impact on it. You give us a hypothetical of a child who might have been abused, but I didn't really hear very clear citation of evidence on this point. Again, it sounds a little bit like you're paraphrasing a study instead of quoting it directly, so I'm not sure that it's as convincing as some of the more specific quotes that are provided by the advocate on this point. All right, thank you.